Judge laughs at black woman in court, then freezes when she flashes her US badge. Welcome to a tale brimming with tension, surprise, and resolution. Today's story shines a light on prejudice within the very institution meant to uphold justice and reveals how the tables can turn in an instant. Follow the gripping events that unfold when a black woman steps into a courtroom and finds herself mocked by the seated judge, only to silence the laughter with one startling flash of her badge. This story is packed with dramatic twists and electrifying moments that will leave you on the edge of your seat, wondering what secrets hide beneath the judge's gavel. Prepare yourselves for an unyielding cascade of events as justice takes an unexpected and riveting path. Before we dive in, if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. If you're excited about this story, let us know. If you enjoyed the video, press 1. If not, press O. Your feedback really inspires me to gather more uplifting and meaningful stories. It was 9 in the morning when the courthouse doors in downtown Chicago swung open to reveal a woman in a sharp charcoal blazer. Her name was Nadine Parker, and her arrival should have passed without fanfare. However, for reasons only she knew, she held her head high, as though she owned not just the day, but the entire building. She had spent the early hours reviewing crucial papers, so she stepped inside with an aura of composure that belied the long night she'd just had. A stack of documents was clutched under one arm, while the other gripped a plain black satchel that she refused to let out of her sight. People came to this courthouse every day, often weighed down by fear or apprehension. Ordinary men and women looked at the high ceilings and hushed halls with trembling hearts, unsure if justice would serve them or fail them. Nadine, however, walked as if she belonged. She was there for her own case, one that had roiled her life for months. If you looked closely, you could see a strange gleam in her eyes, a mixture of determination and a flicker of something else. Maybe excitement, maybe apprehension. It was difficult to tell. But you'd sense that, beneath her stoic exterior, something extraordinary was brewing. Judge Randall Montgomery, known in Cook County Circuit Court circles for his dramatic courtroom performances, was presiding that day. Rumor had it he adored the spotlight. He was said to relish the sound of his own voice so thoroughly he sometimes forgot about the facts of a case. The courthouse staff whispered among themselves that the judge always saved his most merciless remarks for those he deemed inferior, especially people of color who, in his words, lacked sophistication. Despite the official black robes and shiny nameplate, his smirk often betrayed a smug sense of power. In the hallway, Nadine overheard hushed conversations. People murmured about how Judge Montgomery handled recent proceedings with a heavy hand, belittling anyone who questioned his authority. A few minutes before the session began, court officers cleared the hallway to let him pass. A tall, broad-shouldered man in a robe strolled by, lifting his chin in a display of self-importance, as though every step he took was worthy of a royal procession. Nadine stepped back against the wall to let him pass, meeting his gaze briefly. In that moment, a trace of a grin lifted the corner of his mouth, and the echo of a laugh followed. Nadine's eyebrows knitted. It felt directed at her, though she had no evidence. Yet, that moment lingered in her mind as she found her seat inside courtroom 305. The overhead lights shone relentlessly on wooden benches polished by thousands of anxious hands over the years. A large wooden podium and a pair of flags, the American flag and the Illinois state flag, stood to one side. The court reporter took her position, stony-faced, ready to transcribe every utterance. Lawyers in freshly pressed suits shifted in their chairs, checking their notes. Spectators lined the back benches, heads tilted in mild curiosity. As the court session commenced, Each name on the docket was called out one by one. Most cases were routine, but as soon as Nadine's turn approached, an undercurrent of tension seemed to ripple through the room. A few attorneys glanced at one another with eyebrows raised. Perhaps they knew something about Nadine, or maybe they had heard about the case. The overhead clock ticked away, each second punctuated by the scratch of the court reporter's pen. Judge Montgomery loomed behind the bench, banging his gavel from time to time with more force than necessary, as though he took pleasure in the startled reactions of the people before him. When the clerk finally called Nadine Parker, the entire room fell silent. She rose gracefully and stepped forward, head held high. She approached the podium with her documents neatly stacked. At her first glance of the judge, her expression remained serene. It was the calm before a storm, an expression that might have sent shivers down a more empathetic spine. But Montgomery simply leaned back in his seat, arms folded. She could almost see the wheels turning in his mind as he sized her up. He'd done this 1,000 times, peering down from the bench to remind the accused or litigant of their place. "Well, Miss Parker, you've got quite a docket here," he said, letting out a laugh that echoed through the microphone. Nadine didn't flinch. "You filed an injunction regarding certain, shall we say, financial entanglements. Are you representing yourself today?" The question was laced with condescension. The notion of a pro se litigant, especially a black woman, daring to stand without an official attorney in front of him, seemed almost comical in Montgomery's eyes. Nadine nodded. "Yes, Your Honor," she said quietly, her tone so calm it nearly vanished into the hush of the courtroom. A mild confusion rippled among a few observers. Defending yourself in such a high-stakes matter wasn't generally wise. Judge Montgomery's brow furrowed for a moment, as though he couldn't decide if he was offended or amused. Then the corners of his mouth twitched in a barely contained smirk. "If you insist," he said, tapping his pen on the desk, "let's begin by reviewing your claim." He flicked through the pages of a thick file that had been prepared for him. With each page turn, he exhaled a small laugh, reminiscent of a teacher reading a poor student's essay. "You allege fraudulent activity in your bank's handling of your mortgage payments," he said, feigning a yawn. "Is that correct?" "Yes, Your Honor," Nadine responded. She didn't alter her posture or voice, but something in her eyes sharpened. She noticed, too, that the hush in the room thickened. People seemed to sense a simmering tension beneath the surface of this dry legal matter. "I believe I can prove that the institution Midwest Federal Bank engaged in manipulation of documents related to my property title." Montgomery scrolled down a few more lines of the complaint. He muttered. "And you're also claiming an internal corruption that extends beyond the bank into local government agencies." "Yes, Your Honor." This time, the judge let out a short, derisive laugh. He glanced over at the court reporter as though they shared an inside joke. "I see. Quite a grand conspiracy you're alleging here." "That's quite the storyline, Miss Parker. Are you a fiction writer?" He let the question hang, a rhetorical jab meant to emphasize how little he thought of her claims. Surprisingly, Nadine returned a small smile. "No, Your Honor," she replied, voice steady, "but I am highly familiar with official documents." She left it at that. "For now." "Well," Montgomery leaned forward, "it sounds like you've seen one too many thriller movies." "The burden of proof in a court of law, Miss Parker, is significantly higher than idle speculation. If I find your claims lacking substance, it won't bode well for you." Then he chuckled, a drawn-out, mocking sound that would have made the hair on anyone's neck stand on end if they had the slightest empathy. But Nadine's composure never wavered. She inhaled gently, exhaled even more softly. "I understand perfectly, Your Honor," she said, and that was all. No emotion, no tremor. Nothing about her stance indicated fear or doubt. It was a remarkable display, and a few attorneys, exchanging glances from the sidelines, took note. That's when the first flicker of uncertainty crossed Montgomery's features. There was something about Nadine's unwavering calm that unnerved him, though he wouldn't admit it. Despite his best attempt to appear supremely confident, a subtle shift in the room's atmosphere made the judge look around, as though verifying that his domain was still secure. The bailiff and clerk stood unflinchingly in their positions. The court reporter continued her rhythmic typing. Finally, Judge Montgomery cleared his throat. "Very well, Miss Parker, let's proceed. Though I suspect you might be wasting this court's precious time." And so the hearing began. Nadine's voice remained level as she explained the discrepancies in her mortgage statements, the unusual transfers, and the shady backdated documents that placed her finances in jeopardy. Judge Montgomery listened with half-lidded eyes, occasionally suppressing a condescending grin. Each time he opened his mouth, it was to dismiss or question the veracity of her evidence. There were more than a few onlookers who expected Nadine to falter under his mocking scrutiny, but she never did. Halfway through her presentation, the judge held up his hand. "That's enough, Miss Parker," he said, letting out a theatrical sigh. "You've brought forward allegations of fraud on multiple levels, yet I see no substantial proof tying it all together. All I see are photocopies of forms that could have been altered. Anyone with a cheap printer and some Photoshop skills can produce these." He slapped the documents back onto the podium in front of her. "I'd ask if there's anything else you want to share, but I feel like we'd all be better off if I dismiss this nonsense right now and spare everyone the—" Just then, a voice rose from the spectators' seats. "I'd like to hear the rest of Miss Parker's evidence, Your Honor." A slight woman with rectangular glasses stood. She wore a tailored navy blue suit and carried a small leather briefcase. At her words, a ripple of startled gasps fluttered through the courtroom. One didn't just interrupt a judge mid-sentence. Not without fear of contempt. Montgomery narrowed his eyes. "And you are?" The woman presented her card. "Assistant State's Attorney Carolyn Duncan. I've been following this case, Your Honor." She spoke with crisp authority, well aware that Judge Montgomery's pride was stung by her interruption. "I believe Miss Parker's evidence has enough merit to warrant further investigation." She cast a glance at Nadine that brimmed with an unspoken question. "Why didn't you tell me all this before?" Montgomery's irritation was palpable as he took the card. He recognized the name. Duncan had a reputation for fairness and an aversion to corruption. "Miss Duncan," he said, "sharply, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but you are not counsel on record for Miss Parker, nor has the state's attorney's office indicated any involvement." "With all due respect, Your Honor," Duncan interjected, "my colleagues in the investigative division have taken a preliminary interest in Miss Parker's claim. We believe it might tie into a broader pattern of mortgage fraud that's recently come to light in Cook County. I'd like to ensure that we do not prematurely dismiss something that could expose a larger ring of corruption." Murmurs erupted in the gallery. The judge, for a moment, lost his condescending smirk. The tension was so thick it seemed to have its own weight in the room. The notion that there could be a broader conspiracy was no longer comedic fodder. However, Montgomery quickly regained his composure and donned his mask of authority. He cleared his throat. "Very well," he said, in a tone that suggested he was humoring them. "Miss Parker, proceed. But understand that I am doing this to accommodate Miss Duncan's request, not because I find your arguments credible." Nadine nodded in acknowledgement. She continued, calmly outlining the labyrinth of documents, cross-referencing each suspicious discrepancy. The more she spoke, the more closely Miss Duncan listened, and so did everyone else in the courtroom. Even Judge Montgomery found himself unable to wholly disregard her, though he tried his best to maintain a look of bored detachment. When Nadine concluded, the assistant state's attorney asked permission to approach the bench, brandishing a handful of documents that Nadine had faxed to her office the day before. Judge Montgomery waved her forward dismissively. Miss Duncan flipped through the papers, occasionally pointing to lines of text or financial entries that corresponded with Nadine's statements. For the first time, a flicker of real curiosity lit the judge's eyes. He couldn't entirely wave away the possibility that something might be amiss. Still, he refused to relinquish his upper hand. "Well, Miss Parker," he said at last, "these are interesting claims, but we'll need more. Miss Duncan, if you want to pursue an investigation, fine, but as of right now, I remain skeptical." Duncan inhaled, ready to press further, but Nadine raised a hand, politely signaling that she wanted to speak. "Your Honor," she said, "if I may, I do have more evidence to present. However, it is of a sensitive nature. May I approach the bench?" Montgomery paused, clearly annoyed by what he perceived as more theatrics. "We're all adults here, Miss Parker. If you have something more, you can present it. Or are you implying national security or something equally dramatic?" A hush. Nadine took a step closer to the bench. Her voice remained calm, but her eyes bore a quiet intensity. "Actually, Your Honor, yes, this could have national implications, but I'm only able to divulge certain details if we can speak privately or in camera." Her tone was firm, yet polite. A stunned silence gripped the room. "National implications?" The judge almost laughed out loud once more, but Miss Duncan's stoic demeanor caused him to hold his tongue. The judge's eyebrows rose skeptically. "Miss Parker, this is a county court, not the Pentagon. We don't do clandestine briefings here." Nadine, standing just a few feet away from the towering bench, reached into her blazer's inner pocket. Immediately, the bailiff moved forward in alarm, hand drifting toward his holster. Nadine raised her hand to show she posed no threat. "I'm just taking out my identification, officer," she said calmly, a trace of exasperation in her voice. With a measured motion, she pulled out a slim leather case and flipped it open. She angled it so the judge and Miss Duncan could see the emblem bright under the fluorescent lights. It was unmistakable, a badge from the United States Secret Service. Time seemed to stop. A wave of shock rippled through the courtroom, and gasps tumbled from more than a few onlookers' lips. Even Judge Montgomery, who prided himself on controlling every moment, froze with his mouth slightly open. Duncan blinked, her professional poker face cracking as surprise flashed across her features. The bailiff took a step back, eyes wide, uncertain whether to demand more clarity or maintain the calm. Montgomery seemed at a loss for words, an unfamiliar predicament for a man who thrived on talk. "Wow," he began, then coughed to clear his throat. "What is this supposed to mean, Miss Parker?" Nadine snapped the leather case shut. "It means, Your Honor, that while I am not here in an official capacity, I do work for the United States Secret Service. My role has given me specialized knowledge of document forensics and financial fraud investigations. I came here as a private citizen because I wanted to address this wrongdoing directly without implicating my agency. But if that's what it takes to be heard, so be it." A shocked hush persisted in the courtroom. Miss Duncan's eyes gleamed with a mixture of realization and relief, as though she'd finally uncovered the missing puzzle piece of Nadine's stoic confidence. In stark contrast, Judge Montgomery looked as though the floor had dropped from beneath him. This scenario was the last thing he expected. A mocking laugh nearly escaped his lips but died in his throat. The weight of his earlier condescension pressed upon him. The judge swallowed hard, trying to recover his facade of authority. "All right, Miss Parker. Since you've apparently decided to reveal your status, perhaps we should discuss the nature of your evidence in detail. However, I must insist that we keep this information under strict confidentiality if it truly involves national-level concerns." Nadine dipped her head in agreement. "Thank you, Your Honor." But, as relieved as she was to get that far, the sense of tension in the room only deepened. This was no longer just about one woman's mortgage. The puzzle pieces that had begun to fit together hinted at something bigger, a network of financial fraud that might reach influential people in the city or beyond. Duncan flicked her gaze from Nadine to the judge and back again. She had no intention of letting corruption slip through her fingers. Within minutes, the judge called for a short recess. The moment the gavel fell, hushed whispers erupted all around. Observers leaped at the chance to discuss the bombshell revelation. Reporters in the press row fumbled with phones, typing out urgent updates. Court officials exchanged meaningful looks, uncertain how this would impact the day's schedule. And as the bailiff escorted Nadine to a secure anteroom near the judge's chambers, many eyes followed her, brimming with curiosity and, for some, a new respect. In that quiet side room, Nadine found herself seated across from Judge Montgomery, Miss Duncan, and a single court clerk who was designated to record the conversation. The bailiff stood by the door. The space was dimly lit, a single frosted window letting in a pale wash of Chicago daylight. The judge cleared his throat, looking distinctly less self-assured. "I suppose you know how unusual this is," he began, directing his words at Nadine. "Normally we don't hold private sidebars of this nature unless it involves sealed evidence or a national security letter. If I'm going to allow you to present your findings confidentially, I need to understand exactly what's at stake." Miss Duncan folded her arms. "I agree, Your Honor. Miss Parker's credentials suggest that her perspective on financial fraud is more than just speculation. But we need clarity on how this specifically ties into her mortgage issue and these broader allegations of corruption." Nadine had expected their cautious approach. She opened her satchel and withdrew an unassuming manila folder. "These documents are heavily redacted," she said. "They're from prior investigations that the Secret Service has been involved in. They detail certain patterns of money laundering and illegal property seizures that align with what I've discovered in my own case." She passed the folder to Miss Duncan, who scanned the lines carefully. A slow transformation came over Miss Duncan's face, disbelief fading into realization, and then shifting into a determined glint. "I recognize some of these references," she said quietly. "There was an internal review in our department regarding unusual transactions linked to city officials. But we were never able to find the root cause. You're telling me these patterns match up to your own mortgage fiasco?" "Yes," Nadine affirmed, leaning forward. "It's not just the city. There's a certain bank manager at Midwest Federal Bank who, I believe, is part of a ring that's falsifying foreclosure documents, inflating interest rates, and siphoning funds into offshore accounts. People lose their homes, ruin their credit, and never realize they were targets of a systematic scam." Judge Montgomery flipped through the pages Miss Duncan handed him, his eyes narrowing at times as though trying to decipher the blacked-out passages. "So, these are official documents, redacted or not. They suggest an extensive conspiracy." He paused, letting out a breath. "Miss Parker, the first need to know something. Why not reveal your position from the start? Why go through the trouble of presenting yourself as a private citizen?" Nadine's voice was gentle, but firm. "Because, Your Honor, I wanted to expose this without leveraging my badge. I wanted to make sure that an everyday person's complaints would be heard by this court. If I came in with my official credentials, the entire dynamic would change. Unfortunately, it seems the only way to be taken seriously was to let my work speak for itself." The judge's cheeks reddened slightly, but he stifled any defensive retort. He knew all too well how he had laughed at her earlier, how he'd brushed her off. Miss Duncan snapped the folder shut. "If the evidence is as solid as it seems, we're looking at a large-scale operation. Your mortgage might be the linchpin that ties everything together. Your case alone, Miss Parker, could unravel a chain of corruption in local banking and possibly even city government. Montgomery exhaled, suddenly appearing weary. This is bigger than a county-level hearing. Perhaps the U.S. Attorney's Office should be handling this. He turned to Nadine. But since you're the one who set this in motion, I assume your agency will want an official investigation. Is that correct? Nadine nodded. Yes. My supervisor at the Secret Service is aware I've been looking into suspicious activities, but I didn't provide details. Once we compile concrete evidence, I'll notify them. Montgomery tapped his fingers on the tabletop. Despite his arrogant reputation, he wasn't a complete fool. He understood the gravity of uncovering a potentially massive corruption scandal. His earlier dismissiveness threatened to come back and haunt him, especially if the media caught wind of how he nearly threw out a case that might implicate powerful individuals. He cleared his throat. Very well. For now, the matter remains in this court. But I'll cooperate. Miss Duncan, you have the authority to open a deeper investigation. I do, Miss Duncan said, rising from her seat. I'll involve the appropriate state and federal channels. Until then, Miss Parker's case must remain open. If we dismiss or settle it prematurely, we lose a crucial opportunity. Nadine observed all of this in silence. She expected friction, but she hadn't anticipated how quickly Miss Duncan would rally to her side. She felt a quiet gratitude toward the prosecutor. Yet a storm of questions whirled in her mind, questions about whether this corruption extended into the corridors of power in City Hall, or maybe even beyond. She had scratched the surface, but the truth was undoubtedly much bigger. After a short recess, the judge reconvened the court session, but proceedings for Nadine's case were postponed to a later date, sealed from the public until further notice. Onlookers buzzed with speculation, hungry for an explanation as to why a standard foreclosure dispute had abruptly been placed under seal. Most left the courthouse with more questions than answers. The tension in the hallways was a tangible thing. Reporters pounced on Miss Duncan for comments, but she deftly evaded them, citing an ongoing investigation. Judge Montgomery scurried back to his chambers, lips tight with concern. Nadine, for her part, made a swift exit. She stepped out into the brisk Chicago afternoon, the wind cutting across her face. A sense of relief mingled with dread. She'd gotten the judge to take her seriously at a cost. She had revealed her badge, which might trigger dangerous attention from those behind the fraud. People who operated sophisticated mortgage scams and laundered money weren't known for taking exposure lightly. She clenched her satchel strap and made her way down the courthouse steps, determined to see things through, no matter the cost. At the bottom of the steps, Miss Duncan caught up to her. The attorney's breath formed small clouds in the chilly air. "Miss Parker Nadine," she said, more gently now. "I'll be in touch soon. We'll need everything you have, and I'll do my best to get you the resources you need." She paused, a flicker of concern in her eyes. "Watch your back, though. If your suspicions are correct, these people won't be happy you're shining a light on their operation." Nadine offered a tight-lipped smile. "Thanks for the warning, Miss Duncan. But believe me, I've worked undercover in far riskier territories than Chicago. I'll be fine." Her words were confident, but the attorney's caution still rang true in her mind. With that, Nadine merged into the throng of pedestrians, disappearing into the city's ceaseless churn of movement. Little did she know that hidden eyes were already following her, marking her every step. That evening, Nadine returned to her modest townhome on the outskirts of the city. The area was a testament to middle-class resolve, each brick facade telling stories of aspiration. She parked her black sedan in the small driveway and checked for anything unusual. Years of specialized training taught her that the most ordinary detail could betray an intruder: an off-kilter mailbox, a fresh scratch on the door handle, a slightly moved doormat. She found nothing amiss, yet an inexplicable unease throbbed beneath her composure. She unlocked her door and entered the dimly lit living room. The hush felt unnatural. She normally found solace in her home, but that night the shadows were too deep, the silence too absolute. She reached for the nearest lamp, a flick. The bulb glowed faintly, casting a warm arc across the walls and momentarily quelling her apprehension. From a small cabinet, she retrieved a thick black binder labeled with coded markings. Opening it, she reviewed the timeline of suspicious mortgage transactions she had discovered, addresses of foreclosed properties, bank officers' names, suspicious wire transfers. As the minutes ticked by, her confidence grew. She had a solid lead several, in fact, and Miss Duncan's support only strengthened her resolve. Suddenly, her phone buzzed. Nadine lifted it to see a message from a number she didn't recognize. "We know who you are. Stop digging." She stared at the screen, heart thumping hard. It was the kind of threat she'd received before, but each time was a jolt nonetheless. Her mind raced with questions. Who exactly was behind it? Was it someone from the bank? A hired goon? She typed a quick reply. "You've made a big mistake," then thought better of it and deleted the text. Giving away her reaction could invite more trouble. Instead, she secured her phone and binder, then made a call to a contact in the local FBI office, Special Agent Robert Mitchell. He picked up on the second ring. Mitchell speaking. "It's Nadine Parker," she said quietly. "I might need your help." "You always do this, Parker," Mitchell replied with a rueful chuckle. "You pop up out of nowhere with some massive scandal. Tell me what's going on." Nadine exhaled. "I've stumbled onto a big ring of mortgage fraud in Chicago. Possibly official corruption, too. I revealed my U.S. Secret Service status in court this morning, and now I'm getting threats on my phone." A pause. "That's serious." "You want me to open a file?" Nadine thought about it. The FBI had a broad jurisdiction for bank fraud, especially if it crossed state lines or involved major financial institutions. "Not yet," she said. "I want to gather more evidence first. Just letting you know in case something happens to me. Keep an ear to the ground, okay?" Mitchell sighed. "Understood. But be careful, Parker. I know you can handle yourself, but these people can be vicious." She ended the call, a sense of heaviness settling in. The pressure from all sides was mounting, and she had no illusions about how dangerous financial criminals could be, especially when they operated under the shield of influential allies. However, she remained steadfast. Her entire career had been about protecting people from counterfeiters, fraudsters, and conspirators who threatened the stability of the nation's economy. This was no different. It simply felt more personal because her home was on the line. Sleep didn't come easily. The wind rattled her windows, stirring old nightmares of past undercover missions in foreign countries. She'd faced down danger before, but something about corruption on her home turf cut deeper. When she finally drifted off, her dreams were haunted by mocking laughter and the echo of a gavel in a silent courtroom. Morning arrived with a subdued grey sky. Nadine woke early, showered, and prepared a quick breakfast of toast and coffee. Her phone beeped with multiple notifications, some from Miss Duncan, others from unknown senders. One text read, "Your presence in that courtroom was a grave mistake." She inhaled sharply, resisting the urge to fling her phone across the room. Instead, she composed herself and dialed Miss Duncan's number. "Good morning, Miss Parker," came the crisp voice on the other end. "Morning. I've been getting threats," Nadine said. "I'd like to meet and give you everything I have. I'm thinking we should do this in a safe location, not at the courthouse." Miss Duncan didn't sound surprised. "Agreed. I know a private conference center near the Cook County State's Attorney's office. We can have a secure meeting room. How soon can you get here? Within the hour, Nadine replied, already sliding into her blazer. She double-checked her satchel, making sure she had all critical documents, plus an encrypted USB drive containing digital backups. In her line of work, you always had multiple redundancies. She left her home, scanning the street for any suspicious vehicles. A black SUV sat parked across the way. Her instincts flared. However, no one seemed to be inside, and it didn't appear to be running. She made a mental note, but continued on her way. Nothing about her journey to downtown Chicago was overtly unusual, just the usual cluster of morning commuters, horns blaring and the Lake Michigan breeze whipping through the skyscraper corridors. Upon arriving at the designated building, she found Miss Duncan waiting in a small, windowless conference room. The walls were bare, except for a clock ticking loudly enough to set Nadine's teeth on edge. After exchanging greetings, Nadine placed her documents on the table and began her rundown of each red flag. Miss Duncan listened intently, occasionally taking notes. As Nadine walked her through the evidence, Miss Duncan's posture grew increasingly rigid. "This is bigger than I thought," she said, flipping through logs of wire transfers. "These accounts, they trace back to shell corporations registered out of state. That implies an interstate or even international dimension, possibly implicating RICO statutes. You realize that could invite the FBI or the Department of Justice to step in?" Nadine nodded. "I welcome it, especially if it means shutting these operations down permanently." She tapped one particular document. Notice the pattern of transactions from the city's Housing and Development Fund. If the same pattern occurs in multiple properties like mine, this might indicate someone within city government is funneling money for personal gain. Miss Duncan frowned. "If we uncover direct involvement by a city official, the fallout will be enormous. There's a mayoral election coming up. The current mayor prides himself on a clean record. They spent the next hour plotting next steps, including an expansion of Miss Duncan's investigation. The plan involved requesting certain sealed bank documents via subpoena and quietly interviewing key figures at Midwest Federal Bank. The pair agreed to move cautiously. The last thing they needed was tipping off the conspirators, allowing them to destroy evidence. As they concluded their meeting, Miss Duncan asked, "What about Judge Montgomery? Do you trust him now?" Nadine hesitated. "I trust that he's alarmed enough by the potential scandal to cooperate, but I can't forget how he treated me initially. He's got a track record of mocking litigants he deems lesser. I'm not sure if he's a bigot or just high on power. Either way, I doubt he'll be an ally beyond what's necessary for his own survival." A faint smirk touched Miss Duncan's lips. "You might be right. That man is all pomp. But hopefully he's self-serving enough to do the right thing once he realizes what's at stake for his reputation." Nadine gathered her things, concluding, "Time will tell." She offered the attorney a firm handshake. "I'll forward anything new I find. In the meantime, be careful." Miss Duncan nodded, and they parted ways, each consumed by the magnitude of the battle unfolding. Over the following weeks, Nadine split her efforts between her official Secret Service tasks, which she maintained under the radar, and her intensifying private investigation. Miss Duncan's office quietly fed her updates. Suspicious bank officials were being observed. City records were discreetly reviewed, and a labyrinth of shell companies began to reveal a hidden network of complicit accountants, attorneys, and crooked city workers. Unsurprisingly, Judge Montgomery scheduled a new court date for Nadine's case, strictly closed to the public and labeled as sealed. The rumor mill churned. Some courthouse staff speculated that Nadine was a federal informant or a whistleblower. Others whispered about high-level hush-hush deals, though no one had concrete details. One crisp Thursday morning, Nadine stepped into the judge's private chambers at his summons. The air was thick with tension. Montgomery perched behind his mahogany desk, a worried line etched between his brows. Miss Duncan stood to the side, arms folded. A uniformed police officer, clearly top brass, hovered near the back. Nadine closed the door behind her, the quiet click amplifying the hush. "Miss Parker," the judge began, sounding more subdued than she'd ever heard him. "We've reviewed additional evidence from the state's attorney's office. Let's just say I now grasp the seriousness of the allegations. But there's a new development we need to address." He pressed a button, and the door opened again. A man in a crisp suit, with a Federal Bureau of Investigation lapel pin, stepped in. He gave a nod of greeting. Nadine's eyes narrowed. She recognized him, Agent Kevin Ballard, notorious for his unwavering devotion to procedure and a somewhat abrasive style of interrogation. "Hello, Miss Parker," Ballard said, a slight smirk on his lips. "Or should I say, Agent Parker? Don't worry, I've been apprised of your status." He set down a folder on the judge's desk. "We have reason to believe that certain individuals implicated in this case have ties to organized crime. That broadens our scope. Your private efforts have now drawn the attention of the FBI's Organized Crime Division." Nadine maintained a poker face. "I see. Then you must also realize that the Secret Service has concurrent jurisdiction over financial crimes, especially if they involve the forging of federal documents." Ballard nodded. "Of course. The question is, why didn't your agency step in sooner? We could have avoided all this cloak and dagger nonsense." Before Nadine could answer, Miss Duncan interjected. "Miss Parker had every right to pursue her personal mortgage issue. She uncovered links to corruption, and she came to us for help when the evidence pointed to a broader conspiracy. We are here to cooperate, not bicker." Nadine shot Miss Duncan a grateful glance. "That's correct. And, Agent Ballard, I would caution you against dismissing the value of my approach. No matter how unorthodox, it worked. We have more leads now than we would if I'd kicked down the door from the start." Ballard didn't seem thrilled, but he shrugged. "Fine. The FBI is stepping in officially. We'll coordinate with the state's attorney's office and the Secret Service. But be aware, we'll need to question you extensively, Miss Parker, both about your personal involvement and your professional capacity. We can't afford any conflict of interest." The judge cleared his throat, seeking to regain control. "Yes, the important thing is to conduct a thorough, impartial investigation. I've agreed to cooperate fully with federal authorities, which means this court's role will be somewhat limited to hearing Miss Parker's private claim. The rest is beyond my purview." There was a fleeting hint of relief in Montgomery's tone. Nadine wondered if the judge was grateful to step back from a scandal that threatened to devour him. Ballard collected his folder. "Very well. I'll leave you to wrap up, Miss Parker. Expect a formal request for an interview soon." With that, he exited the chambers. Miss Duncan faced Nadine. "You okay with that?" Nadine nodded. "It's an inconvenience, but if it helps bring these criminals to justice, I'll do it." Montgomery leaned forward, folding his hands. "Miss Parker," he said, voice quieter, "I realize we got off on the wrong foot. My initial reaction, let's just say, I should have kept an open mind." For once, he actually seemed contrite, his eyes darting as if searching for a lifeline. "I hope you understand I was merely following typical courtroom procedure." Nadine locked eyes with him. She didn't buy the excuse. She'd seen the smirk, heard the laugh, but she also recognized that any olive branch from Montgomery might smooth the road ahead. So she gave a measured nod. "Thank you, Your Honor. I appreciate the cooperation." He inclined his head. "Your case remains on the docket. We'll wait for the outcome of the investigation before deciding any final rulings on your property dispute. I assume that's acceptable?" "Yes," Nadine replied, turning for the door. "It is." Outside, she let the tension in her shoulders dissolve. Miss Duncan followed, placing a reassuring hand on her arm. "Don't worry. We'll keep everything as contained as possible." Nadine sighed. "I know. But once the FBI is in, contained becomes a relative term." They parted ways, both understanding that the stakes had just risen to a new level. Days became a blur of investigations, interviews, and closed-door meetings. Miss Duncan quietly churned out subpoenas, building a mountain of evidence. Nadine spent late nights combing through bank statements and electronically scouring data. She engaged in delicate communications with her Secret Service superiors, who were now reluctantly pulled into the fray. Agent Ballard, true to form, demanded multiple debriefs, and behind every official step, an undercurrent of danger pulsed, marked by cryptic threats and subtle warnings. One evening, as Nadine returned to her townhome, she discovered a note slipped under her door. The paper was thick, expensive, and the single-typed sentence read, "Your next step is your last." Her heart pounded, but she remained steady. She had faced death threats before. She quickly snapped a photo of the note with her phone, then called Miss Duncan and forwarded the image. Just as she hung up, her phone chimed again. A text from an unknown number. "Check your car." Nadine felt a chill. She rushed outside to her driveway, scanning her black sedan. The tires were fine, the windows intact. Then she saw it, a faint glimmer of a metallic device beneath the rear bumper. Her pulse quickened. A tracking device, or worse, an explosive. She slowly backed away and dialed 911, requesting the bomb squad. As a Secret Service agent, she knew well the protocol for suspicious devices. Blue and red lights soon lit up her street. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains as the Chicago Police Department cordoned off the area. A specialized squad examined her sedan with careful sweeps. Finally, an officer approached Nadine, his expression grim. "It's a GPS tracker, Miss Parker. No explosives or harmful substances. But someone's definitely keeping tabs on you." She muttered a curse under her breath. Miss Duncan arrived soon after, looking alarmed. "We'll need to add this to the intimidation attempts, possibly even file for protective surveillance," she said. "Ha!" Nadine nodded. The severity of the threat was escalating. If the criminals behind the fraud felt the need to track her movements, they were likely planning a strike or, at minimum, a forced confrontation. "Let them track me," Nadine said under her breath, the defiant edge in her voice returning. "I'm not backing down." In the following days, Miss Duncan's office assigned a plainclothes detective to shadow Nadine for safety. She still went about her usual tasks, splitting time between her official role and the case. Yet each day brought new evidence of corruption that extended deeper into Chicago's political underbelly. A city council member's name surfaced in bank records. A well-known real estate mogul appeared linked to the shell companies. And one name popped repeatedly, tying everything together: Marcus Trent, a powerful figure with investments across multiple industries, rumored to have connections to organized crime. The tension reached a boiling point the evening Miss Duncan called Nadine with urgent news. They'd acquired a wiretap recording suggesting a meeting between key conspirators was imminent. "They're gathering tonight at a warehouse near the South Branch of the Chicago River," Miss Duncan said. "We have reason to believe they'll discuss the next steps in laundering money and dealing with you." Nadine felt her heart hammer. She wanted in. "You have the address?" "Yes, but the FBI and Chicago PD are still hashing out a plan. They want to gather enough evidence for a major bust, but we don't want a shootout." Nadine closed her eyes, adrenaline surging. She recalled her Secret Service training in infiltration and covert surveillance. "I can get in there, Miss Duncan," she said. "I'll record everything and slip out before they know I'm there." The attorney's tone shot up in alarm. "Nadine, that's insane. We have law enforcement for that. Let the professionals handle it." "I am a professional," Nadine countered, "and I have a better chance of going unnoticed than an entire SWAT team. If I can capture audio or video incriminating them, that seals our case, no wiggle room." A beat of silence. Then Miss Duncan exhaled. "I'm not comfortable with it, but we're short on time. I'll make some calls." Within an hour, Nadine found herself suiting up in black tactical gear, courtesy of a contact within the local field office who owed her a favor. She arrived near the warehouse location and parked her rental car, a nondescript tan sedan, down a darkened side street. The Chicago River glistened under sporadic industrial lights. She quietly approached the building, noticing the faint glow of interior lamps through the grimy windows. She pressed a small earpiece, ensuring Miss Duncan and the assigned detective could monitor her feed from a safe distance. Inside the warehouse, voices echoed. Nadine slipped in through a side entrance, keeping to the shadows behind towering crates of machine parts. The smell of dust and metal filled her nostrils. She moved slowly, deliberately, pressing record on a concealed camera pinned to her gear. Peeking around a stack of crates, she saw them 5 men and 1 woman standing around a makeshift table spread with documents. She recognized 2 faces from the investigation files, a senior executive from Midwest Federal Bank and a city official from the housing department. A tall, imposing figure in a tailored suit dominated the group. Nadine's gut told her it had to be Marcus Trent. He exuded an air of command that suggested wealth and power. "Now," he said in a deep, resonant voice, "we need to address this Parker situation. She's digging too deep, and she's a Fed." "She's stepping on too many toes," said another man with a shaved head and a Chicago accent. "You want us to handle it quietly?" Marcus Trent tapped the table with a gloved fingertip. "I want her gone permanently. Our associates in the network are nervous. The FBI sniffing around is one thing, but a Secret Service agent focusing on our operations, that's a problem." Nadine's heart pounded. This was the direct threat she needed on tape. She shifted her position to ensure the camera captured Trent's face. A flicker of movement caught her eye. Another guard patrolled the perimeter. She ducked behind the crate, pressing herself into the shadows, praying he wouldn't see her. The conversation continued, growing more incriminating by the minute. They spoke of laundering money through real estate deals, bribing city officials, and forging title documents. Then, to Nadine's horror, the discussion returned to her. Trent demanded immediate action, her murder, if necessary. "No more warnings," he snarled. "If the Parker woman breathes another day, that's 1 day too many." A hush fell. Nadine's pulse thundered in her ears. She had enough. She started backing away, anxious to escape with the evidence. As she rounded a corner of crates, she collided with something solid, a security guard. He stumbled, just as startled as she was. Without hesitation, Nadine struck first. Her elbow caught the side of his jaw, sending him sprawling. He hit the ground with a dull thud, but not before he shouted, "Intruder!" Chaos erupted. Lights blazed on overhead, and the group near the table scattered, some drawing weapons. Nadine sprinted for the side entrance, weaving between crates. A gunshot rang out, sparking off a metal beam just inches away from her. She ducked, returning fire with a small handgun drawn from her holster. More shots followed. She dove behind a forklift, breath ragged. Her earpiece crackled with Miss Duncan's frantic voice. "Are you okay?" "We heard gunfire. I'm pinned down," Nadine hissed. "They spotted me." Another bullet whizzed past. She fired back, forcing her pursuers to take cover. Her mind raced, scanning for an alternate exit. She spotted a ladder leading up to a lofted storage area. If she could reach it, maybe she could find a window or a catwalk exit. She dashed to the ladder, footsteps echoing. The conspirators scrambled, shouting instructions. One of them circled around to cut her off. Nadine aimed, fired, forcing him to duck. Another man emerged from behind a wooden crate. She feinted left, then swung the butt of her handgun, cracking it against his ribs. He crumpled with a groan. She scaled the ladder 2 rungs at a time, bullets pinging off the metal steps. Her pulse thundered in her temples as she finally reached the loft, scanning frantically for a way out. A tiny window in the far corner beckoned. She sprinted, ignoring the stinging burn in her thigh, possibly grazed by a bullet. More shots rang out, smashing crates and equipment. Adrenaline fueled her. She slid behind a metal panel, reloaded her weapon. Below, she saw Marcus Trent orchestrating the pursuit, barking orders. Nadine needed an immediate extraction. She pressed her earpiece. "Duncan, I'm at the top loft. I have the footage, but I'm pinned. I need backup." "We're inbound," Miss Duncan responded. "Chicago PD and FBI are converging on your location. Hang on." Below, men in suits fanned out, footsteps thudding. The echo of sirens in the distance signaled the cavalry. Yet the conspirators remained determined, firing up at the loft. Dust and debris rained down on Nadine. She crawled to the window and tested it. Locked, but the glass was old. She fired a single shot at the latch, then kicked the window, shattering it. Cold night air rushed in. She swung a leg out onto the small ledge outside, perched precariously above a steep drop to the gravel below. Alarms blared in the building. Another bullet whipped past her, smashing part of the window frame. Nadine gritted her teeth, launching herself from the ledge. She landed in a controlled roll onto the gravel, ignoring the jolt of pain. Behind her, the warehouse entrance burst open, revealing the flashing lights of approaching squad cars and FBI vehicles. She scrambled up, limping toward the line of police. Officers fanned out, aiming their weapons at the building. Agent Ballard jumped from an unmarked SUV, rushing to Nadine. "We've got them cornered," he said breathlessly. "Did you record all of that?" Nadine nodded, pressing a trembling hand to her side, where blood seeped from a graze. "Got everything we need," she managed. "Marcus Trent, he's inside, orchestrating everything. They want me dead." Ballard let out a low whistle. "They're finished. We'll take them down." Then he signaled to the SWAT team, which poured into the building. Within minutes, a cacophony of shouts and gunfire rang out. The criminals, outnumbered and outmaneuvered, had no chance. One by one, they were disarmed and taken into custody. A battered Marcus Trent, eyes flashing with fury, was hauled out in handcuffs. Spotting Nadine, leaning against a squad car, he spat a curse at her. She simply stared back, unflinching. Miss Duncan arrived, her face pale. "Thank God you're okay." She examined Nadine's wound. "We need to get you to a hospital." Nadine shook her head. "I'm fine. Just a graze." "We got them, Miss Duncan. We finally got them." The attorney exhaled in relief, glancing toward the battered warehouse. "Yes, we did. And we have enough on tape to put them away for years." Her eyes then flicked to Marcus Trent, who was shoved into the back of a squad car, cursing all the while. "With him in custody, we can blow this entire corruption ring wide open." Nadine nodded, chest heaving. As paramedics approached, she allowed herself a rare moment of pride. The conspiracy that threatened her life, indeed, threatened countless lives, was now dismantled. And she had delivered the crucial blow. The final chapter of this saga unfurled in the courtroom where it had all begun. Judge Montgomery presided over a series of hearings that involved some of the biggest names in local politics and banking. The once mocking judge appeared subdued, fully aware that the entire nation had eyes on this corruption case. One by one, the conspirators faced indictments and pleaded guilty or no contest to charges of racketeering, fraud, and conspiracy. Marcus Trent's trial loomed as the centerpiece. Federal prosecutors lined up a mountain of evidence, courtesy of Nadine, Miss Duncan, and the combined investigative efforts of multiple agencies. Amid the high-profile trials, Nadine's own mortgage case re-emerged. With the fraudulent dealings exposed, Midwest Federal Bank scrambled to drop any false claims. The bank's officials, desperate for leniency, quietly settled with Nadine, restoring her property title. They also set aside funds to compensate other victims who had been wronged by the scheme. On the day the settlement was finalized, Nadine stepped into the same courtroom, her posture erect, her gaze steady. Judge Montgomery, carefully impartial, approved the agreement. "Miss Parker," he said, addressing her with an unfamiliar respect, "the court recognizes your diligence and extraordinary efforts in bringing these crimes to light. Your personal matter is resolved, and I see no reason to continue this case further." Nadine nodded, feeling a quiet sense of vindication. As she gathered her papers, she heard the judge speak again, more softly. "I owe you an apology, Miss Parker," he said, cheeks coloring. "I misjudged you initially. I hope you can accept my regret for my unprofessional reaction." She paused. A hush draped the onlookers. Finally, Nadine offered a small smile. "Thank you, Your Honor. I appreciate that." She walked out of the courtroom with her head held high. Justice, in the end, had found its way to the very place where she was once belittled and mocked. The karmic retribution that followed was both fitting and thorough. A legion of corrupt officials toppled from power. Bank executives faced lengthy prison sentences. Real estate sharks saw their empires crumble, and the secret puppet master, Marcus Trent, was convicted on multiple federal charges, sentenced to decades behind bars. As for Judge Montgomery, the scandal cast a spotlight on his demeanor, prompting renewed scrutiny of his track record. Though he escaped legal consequences, his public image bore a permanent stain. No more carefree laughter from the bench. Late one afternoon, as Nadine locked the door of her newly secured townhome, her phone buzzed with a text from Miss Duncan. "We did it. Justice served." Nadine smiled. This victory belonged not just to her, but to everyone who refused to remain silent. The story had begun with a condescending laugh in a courtroom, yet it ended in the unbreakable truth of accountability. Thank you for joining us on this gripping journey, from a judge's careless mockery to the explosive downfall of a powerful corruption ring. Nadine Parker's courage and determination illuminate just how potent the truth can be, especially when bolstered by resilience and unshakable resolve. From backroom deals and coded threats to FBI raids and courtroom revelations, every twist in this story served to remind us justice might be delayed, but it cannot be denied when we choose to fight for what's right. If you enjoyed this dramatic saga of hidden conspiracies and karmic payback, please remember to hit the like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more riveting true-to-life stories. Thank you for watching.